All right, let's dive into one of the shortest and, one of the most mysterious chapters in the entire history of the papacy. It's a story that kicks off with a totally unexpected election, this huge wave of optimism, and then it all ends with a death that honestly still sparks debate even decades later.
Just 33 days. That's it. That was the entire reign of Pope John Paul I, born Albino Luciani. We're talking barely a month to lead one of the oldest, most powerful institutions on the planet. And just to put that into perspective for you, his papacy was like the blink of an eye, especially for an institution that literally measures time in centuries. It's one of the shortest reigns in modern history, for sure. And that brevity, well, that's a huge part of this story.
So this absolute whirlwind of events led to 1978 being called the year of the three popes. Can you imagine? A year of just immense change and, frankly, instability for the Catholic Church. But the real question, the one we're going to dig into, is this. How did this brief, super hopeful papacy end up getting so shrouded in mystery and suspicion?
Well, it all starts with the process that actually made him pope in the first place, the papal conclave. An event that's just steeped in secrecy and centuries of tradition.
You can really think of the papal conclave as the ultimate closed-door decision. The cardinals are literally locked away from the rest of the world. And because of all that secrecy, trying to predict the outcome, it's pretty much impossible for anyone on the outside.
But get this, that hasn't stopped people from trying to guess the outcome for centuries. Look at this report from the 16th century. It shows that betting on the next pope was like big business in Rome. Gamblers would be shelling out money for inside info, just trying to get any kind of edge on what has to be the most secretive election in the world.
And the 1978 election is the perfect example of this secrecy in action. The London bookmakers had their favorites all lined up. You had cardinals like Pignatelli and Baggio leading the pack. But the guy who would actually become Pope John Paul I, Albino Luciani, he wasn't even on the radar. He was nowhere near the top. So his election, it wasn't just a surprise. It was a complete shock.
So, the big question is, who was this humble outsider who suddenly became Pope John Paul I?
Well, he was very quickly nicknamed Il Papa del Sorriso, the smiling pope, and for really good reason. His warmth and his humility, they were just a total breath of fresh air. You have to remember, in a role that's so often defined by grandeur and power, he saw himself simply as a teacher and a servant.
And you can really get a sense of his unique personality in his book Illustrissimi. It's a collection of letters written to all sorts of imagined correspondents, everyone from Mark Twain to Pinocchio. This was so not your typical papal writing. It was witty, it was charming, and it made really complex ideas feel accessible to just about anyone.
And right from day one, he started to change things. He was the very first pope to take a double name, John Paul, to honor the two popes who came before him. He totally ditched the lavish, over-the-top coronation for a much simpler inauguration ceremony. He even wanted to get rid of the sedia gestatoria, that portable throne popes were carried on. But he was talked into keeping it, mainly so the crowds could actually see him.
So the world was really just starting to get to know the smiling pope. And then, just as quickly as he arrived, he was gone.
On the morning of September 29, 1978, the news broke, and it was stunning. The Pope was dead. The entire world was just in shock. I love how one cardinal put it. He said he was like a meteor, a brilliant flash that lights up the heavens and then just disappears in an instant.
Now, the official story that came out of the Vatican seemed pretty straightforward. They said he was found by his priest secretary, he was reading a spiritual text, and he had simply died of a heart attack. A tragic death, for sure, but a natural one. But this is where the story starts to get really complicated.
Okay, let's talk about the inconsistencies, because almost immediately, these little cracks started to show in the official story. And these discrepancies, they're what fueled decades of suspicion, and yes, conspiracy theories.
This is really where the official narrative just starts to fall apart. See, the Vatican later admitted they changed their story. It wasn't his secretary who found him. After all, it was a nun. And he wasn't reading some spiritual text, he was just going over routine Vatican paperwork. And maybe most critically, no autopsy was ever performed. So you have to ask, why change the story? Those inconsistencies created this vacuum that was just destined to be filled with suspicion. And that leads us to the most explosive theory of all, one that was really brought to global attention by the author David Yallop, that Pope John Paul I was murdered. And the alleged motive? It was huge. The theory is that he was on the very brink of exposing massive corruption deep within the Vatican's own bank.
Now, according to this theory, some very powerful figures stood to lose absolutely everything. The claim is that John Paul I was getting ready to clean house, to fire key officials and launch a massive investigation into this tangled web of corruption, a web that allegedly involved the mafia and even a shadowy Masonic lodge. So the theory goes, he was silenced right before he could expose the whole thing.
So where does all this leave us? Well, basically with two completely competing narratives that are still debated to this day. On one hand, you have a natural death that was just shrouded in some really clumsy secrecy, and on the other, a truly sinister plot.
Now, a more recent investigation, back in 2017, it got access to new documents, and it did back up the official conclusion that he died of a heart attack. But, and this is a huge but, without an autopsy, there's just no definitive proof. At the end of the day, the Vatican's initial secrecy created the perfect breeding ground for suspicion, which all ties back to its very nature as a closed-door institution.
And that, right there, is why the mystery of the 33-day papacy still fascinates us. It really raises a much bigger, more fundamental question, doesn't it? In institutions that are built on secrecy, can the full truth ever really be known? You see, when an institution's first instinct is to control the narrative, it unintentionally ends up fueling the exact kind of speculation it's trying to shut down. When the facts are obscured, even for what might seem like small reasons at the time, mystery will always find a way to take root and grow.